Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Front page sucks today, so let's all post our real stories. I don't mean they have to be completely unexplainable. Half the things on here can be explained away. And my story is probably attributable to some serious mental issues I was going through at the time. But just because you can explain it, doesn't make it not creepy. Just make it something that hasn't been passed around a few thousand times, please. I shall begin. It was about 6 years ago now. My parents had gotten their divorce, and after spending 2 years previously with my drunk of a father, I decided to live with my mom instead. I was already old enough to move out. I simply didn't have any opportunities to do so at the time. So I moved into an empty room at my mom's place. Due to everything being chaotic and lack of funds, I didn't have an actual bed at the time. So I instead got a lovely air mattress covered in duct tape in night futile attempts to prevent deflation. Wonderful. Oddly enough, though, I was able to get my hands on a TV since my friends had a spare one lying around. I set that up near the door of the room across from the mattress. The house was a small rental. It was cheap and it was terrible. The windows weren't double-paned, so there was a serious dust problem, and there were small cracks where spiders and ants constantly made their way in. To make matters worse, my mom had 2 very hairy dogs, which she never seemed to bathe, and so the dust and dead bugs were coated with a second carpet weaved of discarded dog fur. The worst part, it was still better than living with my dad. Anyways, the weird things started pretty innocuously. I'd lost lots of sleep since every time my body hit the floor through the deflating air mattress, I'd wake up. Usually this happened several times a night. Being intuitive, though, I had managed to arrange a massive glut of pillows beneath me into a pseudo-mattress, and sleep would continue until I fell off. Then I became aware that not every time I woke up was caused by the mattress. I started realizing that sometimes, just in that half-asleep haze, where your eyes are still closed, but you're vaguely aware that your sleep has been interrupted, I'd hear a combination of static and a whispering voice. The voice was unclear at first. It sounded simply like my brother was talking in his sleep in the next room, something he'd done since he was little. He also tends to sleepwalk, which always creeped me out. So I figured it was my imagination. But then, as I got used to these cuts into my nightly schedule, I got into the routine of immediately opening my eyes when sleep ended, to speed up the process of returning to sleep. So one night I wake up and see my TV is on with static on, for about half a second before going black. Shrug it off, back to sleep. A few nights later, the voice started becoming louder and clearer. "Help me, it's all gone." Lots of weird phrases were what I heard, as well as my own name. Obviously, I got freaked out quite a bit from this, but I was aware of my sleeping issues and some slight depression and hallucinations in my past, so I convinced myself to ignore it and keep sleeping. On top of this, there were some weird issues starting to crop up during the day. First of all, there was a child in town with some sort of birth defect. She was actually around 25, but due to the defect, she had the body of a slightly deformed child and the face of an old lady. Weird enough, she would just walk into homes if you left the door unlocked. She did this a lot. It's not connected to anything else here. It just made the place seem all the weirder. Second of all, TVs and radios all around the house would turn on and off spontaneously from time to time. This could be again explained away, but more weird stuff at the same time makes you question the explanations, you know? And third, and probably weirdest, were the absurd mood swings. I'd be perfectly happy one moment, and then suddenly crying uncontrollably for no reason for an hour. My brother and mom had similar issues. My brother would get inexplicably angry, and my mom would get inexplicably scared, etc. The weird part was that we were fully aware that we had no reason for any of the moods, but we just had the mood for no reason. Then, after some time of everything going on like that, once again, I woke up in the dead of night to static and whispers of my name. As per standard operating procedures, I opened my eyes, pulled my body up, and looked toward the TV and door. There, peeking out from the hall, was the silhouette of a girl. Pitch black, with white holes for eyes and long black hair. It was only a quick second. Then, as the TV turned off, she disappeared. I damn near lost it. I refused to sleep in my room any longer. That face convinced me that everything up until now was not simply a coincidence, and that there was something seriously wrong with the house. I was afraid of the whole house, but that room in particular was the worst one. And before you say it, it was not the birth defect girl. She never comes out at night, and besides, the door was locked, as it was most often those days. So I set up camp in the living room. There was no space on the floor and there was no couch. The only place to sleep was a small love seat which barely held 2/3 of my body's length. I managed to work it so that I would sleep in a half-sitting, half-lying position across the length of it, though, with pillows as a mattress. But that wasn't enough. I was still scared and sleepless. So I decided to start leaving the lights on and letting the dog sleep beside me out there. Also, I started playing music while I slept. Anything to keep everything in that house off my mind. But the TV out in the living room also suffered from the static issues. So I decided to set the TV every night to a Disney movie and sleep with it on. Make fun of me if you want. I was scared of everything in that house. And Disney movies were the safest thing I could think of. Of course, I told my mom and brother about it, since I had to explain my weird actions to them. They agreed that it was weird, but suggested I see a psychiatrist again as soon as possible. Looking back, it still could have been a psychiatric issue, but hey, hindsight is 20/20. After a couple months of that, one night I was woken up again. Nowadays, I was woken up by the sounds of Disney films rather than from static and whispers. I heard a sound from down the hall, a slight whisper or whimper or something. Still can't place it exactly. All I know is it sounded very, very sad. I still can't figure out why I decided it would be a good idea to figure out what was making the sound. It was a momentary lapse in sanity, or a momentary lapse in insanity, depending on how you see it. But nonetheless, I went down the hall, only to find that the sound came, surprise, surprise, from my former room. I turned the doorknob and opened the door and walked in to find the entire room black, but glowing with red-orange. The red-orange was coming from cracks in the walls, ceiling, and floor. The sound of static filled the room, and then I realized that it wasn't the sound of static. It was the roaring of flames licking the side of the room. And there in the corner, in a fetal position, was the silhouette girl, making that same sad noise and whispering various things throughout. I ran away screaming. I know I woke up my family, and probably woke up a couple other people in the area. I ran out of the house, half crying from fear. My mom came up to me and managed to calm me down. She gave me a couple Advil PMs, the closest we could find to sleeping pills in the house. And I watched Lilo and Stitch until I passed out in the living room. And my former room? Well, it was normal whenever anyone went to check. My nights were all drug-induced from that point forward. We ended up moving out a month or two after that. And as soon as we moved out, I got not only a new bed, but some serious sleep. The visions and whispers and mood swings disappeared the moment we left that house. Like I said, it could be electrical issues and hallucinations and lack of sleep. That's all possible. But whether it was that, or a gateway to hell, or a haunting from a girl who died in a fire, I just know I am never setting foot in that house again.
A long time ago, from about 1992 to 1995, I lived in Fort Riley, Kansas. I was an Army brat. My dad was a career man in the Army Medical Corps, and my mom was a social butterfly who spent more time hobnobbing in the officers' wives' club than she did with me. I was about 6 when we first moved there, so I was alone in that house for long periods of time. We lived in this great big brick house on Pershing Avenue. I don't know what it was, but a few weeks after we moved into that house, the atmosphere just felt oppressive. I was just scared to be alone in that place. Whenever I was alone, it felt like someone or something was watching me. I felt like I was being hunted. Then I started hearing things. Sometimes I heard a woman's voice. It was very faint, like she was whispering or calling from far away. Usually she would just whisper my name, others she would mutter incomprehensible gibberish. The first few times I heard it, I thought it was my mother calling me. Eventually I learned to recognize it. It was a strange sound. I didn't hear it so much as I felt it, like the voice was coming from inside of me. Then I started to see it. To this day, I'm not sure if it was just my imagination or if I really did see something. I always glimpsed this thing out of the corner of my eye, and as soon as I looked, it was gone. I never caught more than an outline. It was about my height. I was a little kid at the time, just over 4 feet tall. However, over a third of this thing's mass was taken up by a massive, bulbous, misshapen head. Attached to the head, it had a tiny body with little stubby legs and long spindly arms that nearly reached the floor. I would always spot it just standing in a doorway staring at me. It never moved, never approached, just stared. That doesn't mean it didn't scare the ever-loving crap out of me. The first time I saw it, I just about wet myself. I was a very imaginative and somewhat lazy type B kid with 2 stressed out, overworked type of parents who easily got annoyed if I bothered them with kids' stuff, so I left it alone. I convinced myself that I had just imagined it. Then I saw that thing again. I always saw it in my room, standing just outside my doorway staring at me. Nighttime got really scary after that. I started to get night terrors. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, unable to move, and I never saw the thing with the big head, but I could feel it in the room with me. To this day, I'm not sure if it was just an overactive kid's imagination or if something supernatural really did terrorize me for over 4 years. You want to hear something weird, though? The night terrors and voices stopped the day we moved out of that house.
One thing comes to mind. Some weird stuff ends up in the lost and found bins at the YMCA. Case in point, I was cleaning up the changing rooms one evening and found an old tape recorder sitting in the exact center of one of the shower stalls, right on top of the little drain. There was a cassette inside, and it took a little drying off, but eventually I got it to play. The recording was exactly 23 minutes and 17 seconds. It consisted entirely of a male voice repeating the words "I'm not" over and over again. I thought it was a short loop at first, but I listened a bit closer and realized that each repetition of the phrase had a slightly different inflection. Furthermore, I could hear no static cutoff. This means that the man who made this recording repeated the words "I'm not" over and over again for 23 minutes and 17 seconds. At around the 13-minute mark, a muffled voice could be heard in the background. All I could make out was "It's by the bookcase." Aside from that, there were no interruptions. I finished cleaning, hurrying so I could clock out when I was supposed to. Finally, I dropped the tape recorder in the lost and found bin near the front desk. My walk home seemed a great deal longer that night.
Around 2 years ago, a friend and I decided to take a stroll in the woods around my house. It was totally normal until we found this large stone that looked like a box I've never seen before. I've lived in my house my entire life and played in those woods since I was a child. We decided to open it. The top half slid off and broke on the ground. It suddenly felt very weird, like a heaviness that wasn't there before. I noticed fog rolling down the hills towards us. It was a warm, sunny day during summer when this happens. Then it got extremely cold. Her and I started running for some reason. We were scared even though it was just fog. We started running up the opposite hill toward my house. It seemed to take forever. It started getting dark and raining. The rain quickly turned to hail as we ran as fast as we could uphill. Once we passed the tree line into my backyard, it was back to being a warm, sunny day. A few months later, I went back into the woods. I have yet to ever find that box-shaped rock again.
I got one. After I moved out of Ireland, I decided to go back every once in a while to backpack around it. I did this about 3 times in 8 years. So last time I did this, I'm going through County Tipperary when I decided to make camp. I'm pretty much out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 kilometers from the town of Nanagh. So I set up near this mound with some small stones near it. Pretty common to find that sort of thing anywhere in Ireland. And I know there's a few more of them around Nanagh. The ancient Irish built tons of stuff like that, and I always liked seeing them. The myth around the mounds is that they're the gates to the homes of fairies, the Awisi, people of the mounds, Tuatha Da Danann, whatever you want to call them. So after a bit of exploring around the area, I decided to get some rest. When I wake up, I feel hungover. I check my watch, digital, and it tells the date, and I swear I lost 2 days. I check my phone, it says the same thing. I know it was a Tuesday when I fell asleep. It was Thursday when I woke up. Freaked me out.
Hooray for this still being here. I guess I'll contribute my dad's stories. My dad's a pretty morbid guy, but he doesn't bullshit around. He used to be a cop, and still is to some extent, monkeys around at the federal courthouse in town. He used to be an evidence technician, so I was often treated to stories at dinner about various crime scenes. One night he asked me out of nowhere if I'd ever seen anything weird, and I laughed, because I'm a stupid kid. Of course I see weird things I can't explain. I vaguely knew how the sky worked at that point in my life. He proceeded to tell me about an afternoon in his childhood where he and his friends saw something they couldn't explain. They were walking home, cutting through the school play yard, when they noticed a little girl by herself on the swing set. Being 50s typical nice kids, they walked over to ask her stuff and make a new friend. But she wouldn't answer their questions, and she was dressed in a big wool sweater and socks, which was off because it was summer. They started to get worried that maybe something was wrong with her, asked her where she lived so they could take her home. Did she need a doctor? They gave up eventually and started to walk away, not 10 paces from where they'd been standing, and one of them turned back. You guessed it, the swing was moving but she wasn't there. But my dad's not a bullshitter, so I agreed that it was odd and didn't bring it up again. His childhood friend would drop by every couple of months and they'd go out drinking, so about a year later, while I had this guy alone, I asked him casually if he'd ever seen a ghost. His face nodded up and he told me the same story, but from his recollection. I have reason not to believe them. They definitely saw something that day, I just don't know what it was. The second is probably better, or worse, because it happened to him as an adult, and he had pictures. He'd been called out on a disturbance at a residence. The woman owned a townhouse, and lived in the downstairs half by herself. The upper half was vacant. She had rented it out to a family member, a sibling I think, and they'd died some time before. The furniture was still in the apartment, and she believed either someone had broken in or an animal had gotten in through the roof. Apparently someone was playing the piano. So my dad is outside listening to her, and he can hear the piano playing. There's no way it can be an animal, it's music, not random noises. She gets the key and gives it to him so he can unlock the door. As soon as the tumbler in the lock clicks, the music stops. He opens the door, it's dark, and it's empty. He searches around for signs of animal life or forced entry, sees nothing, and leaves. He walks back down and tells her that no one was up there. The music starts again. Again he goes back up and unlocks the door, and the music stops as he does so. This time he checks the piano. Maybe it's a player piano or this lady is spending her tax dollars in the most bizarre way possible. But it's a regular piano. With the wooden bench over the keys shielding it from dust. With no strings. My dad hightails it back downstairs and tells the woman what's what. Then upstairs the music starts again, but this time there's loud bashing, like when you slam your fists onto the keys. He goes back up, but this time leaves the door wide open. No more music. He took some pictures, nothing weird in them though, and the next day he drove by to check on her and the piano was at the curb waiting to be picked up by sanitation.
And following the /X/ tradition, he doesn't post the pictures.
Alright, I'm the youngest of 3 kids. There's me and my 2 sisters. We'll call them X and Y. X is 21, Y is 23, and I'm 19. So my dad bought my great-grandparents' house a while ago and gave it to my sisters to move into. About a week after they moved in, X was sleeping when she woke up because she felt like someone was watching her. When she woke up, her light was on, and she remembered turning it off. She rolled over and looked at her door, and someone or something was looking at her through the door. She screamed for Y to
get in here.
And when Y ran in, there was no one at the door. The next part is kinda creepy, but could be explained really easily. My little cousin was over here, at X and Y's house. I live here too now. And she went into X's room with our dog Buck. After being in there for about a minute, she lets loose this blood-curdling scream. We run in to see what's wrong, thinking the dog might have bit her, and she's sitting in the corner, pushing herself against the wall as hard as she can, and cramming her face into the corner. We asked her what had happened, and all she said was,
He tried to take me away. I didn't want to go.
After a half hour or so, she calmed down and claimed that the dog barked at her and it scared her. The house is small, and we were all in the next room. There's no way we wouldn't have heard the dog bark.
The way my house is set up, if I walk out of my room, the bathroom door is directly to my right, and straight down the hall is my brother's room. About 10 years ago, I walked out of my room and saw my brother walking into his room very clearly. He turned, looked at me, and tilted his chin up to greet me, then closed the door. I started walking towards the room to go hang out with him when the bathroom door suddenly opened and my brother walked out. I got a little panicky, explained what had happened, and we went and checked his room together. He was my older brother, in case it's not obvious, and didn't find anything. In the end, I don't think he really believed me, but he did admit that he had left the door to his room open when he went to the bathroom because we had a new puppy who was still exploring the house, but of course the doppelganger had closed it.
I live in a small timbering town just south of Hudson Bay, Ontario. A friend of mine, along with several other people, would talk about a creature that lived out in the forest and fields that was over 20 feet tall with long, spindly legs, hairy, and had huge bug eyes. Anyways, my friend began to obsess about the idea of this monster, calling it the Stiltwalker or the Stilt Motherfucker later on. He would go out for long periods of time, apparently looking for it. The more he did this, the angrier and more upset he seemed to get, and became absolutely furious whenever the topic of the creature came up. He was posting his experiences on here several months ago, from what I saw, and claimed he'd seen it many times. Then his posts just stopped. I went over to his house to check on him, but he wasn't home. A couple days later, without any sign of him, I asked around the community if they had seen him. Only one man saw him those few days ago, said he was heading out of town in a fury and a camera. I organized a small search party with the police, and very soon we found him about 4 miles out in the country with the top half of his head missing, like it was bit off at his mouth. They said there was one picture on it, the rest of them were corrupted, and the police stowed the camera as evidence. Anyways, I was really sad about my friend being killed, but I'm not sure if the thing he was watching had anything to do with it. It could have been, and most likely was, a random act of violence.
That one was based on the Texas Stiltwalker urban legend from the late 2000s, rather than the obscure creepypasta as the post predates it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.